Hey everybody, welcome to episode 4 of Let's Get Educated. Today I want to talk to you guys about voter ID, particularly in the state of Pennsylvania because that is where I live. I'm networking all the time on social media when I'm out and about, and I find that there is a vast majority of people who do not understand the history of voter ID in our state, and it's become a hot topic all across the country. And what you need to know is it's actually been tried before in Pennsylvania. There's a story behind it. So back in 2012, voter ID legislation was introduced into our General Assembly. It actually passed the House of Representatives. It passed the Senate. And the governor at the time, his name was Tom Corbett, he signed it into law. Now that's the normal process of how things go from a bill that is written up by our legislature through the process of actually becoming a law. It did that. So why don't we have voter ID? Why didn't we have it in 2016? And why was the debacle of 2020 what it was? Due to a lack of voter ID. Well, what had happened was there was a felon on the east side of the state, just got out of jail, and because of whatever he did that landed him in the jail cell, he was not able to get a valid driver's license, Pennsylvania driver's license, and he argued then that voter ID was suppressing his vote and disenfranchising him because he was ineligible for a driver's license. He took that to court. It went all the way to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And since our Supreme Court is so lovely and biased, highly democratic, and legislating from the bench like crazy, they of course ruled in his favor and ruled the law was unconstitutional, and our voter ID went out the window. And I believe that was around 2014. You can look all of this up for confirmation, but that is 100% fact that we would have had voter ID if it wasn't for one person kicking and screaming because they felt like it wasn't constitutional and it was ruled in their favor. The reason why that's significant, if you're ticked about the 2020 election and about the lack of integrity, the lack of investigation into pretty much anything into the state of Pennsylvania, by the way, one of the swing states, it is the only swing state that virtually nothing has been done to investigate the irregularities and the shenanigans that went on the week of November 3rd that delivered what I believe is an illegitimate victory to Joe Biden. Where was I going with that? I get sidetracked so easily. Voter ID. Oh, the swing states that did absolutely nothing to look into the irregularities. Now, people are screaming for voter ID. Well, the reason that's going to be so hard to do moving forward for us is because since there's a court precedent, since our Supreme Court already ruled it unconstitutional, the only way around that is if it actually ends up on a ballot, what we the people can vote for. And that's not exactly an easy process, and it's nothing that's going to happen overnight. Recently, Senator Doug Mastriano, who we think is a good guy, introduced election reform legislation, which I think is great, but how can we reform something that we haven't fully investigated yet to find out exactly what went wrong? We're hearing from all our legislatures, well, we know what went wrong. Well, my question to them is, well, how do you know when nothing entered a discovery phase in the court process, no evidence was actually presented to a judge, and no investigation was done? So how in the world do you know what to reform? So it's nice that they throw that in there, but I think part of the possibility perhaps is that our state legislatures and senators don't even know the history on voter ID. Doug Mastriano is relatively new. This is his first term. He's not a career politician, and I think it's a possibility that he doesn't even know that. So I'm putting this video together in hopes to get the word out to every Pennsylvania citizen. If you know people in Pennsylvania, please feel free to share this if you think it would help them. They need to understand there's a history behind this, and we have a serious uphill battle if that's what we're relying on to get our elections on the right track and to get things moving forward where we the people can elect our representatives in the future and not make it from the uni party that is trying to completely take over our country, turning it into a socialist communist China. So that's the history of voter ID. The next one that I'm going to do, this is a quick, short, sweet, quick to the point. Wanted to get this out. I'm going to do another video talking about voter suppression, because that's the argument right now. Although it is a small area of the population, I love that these big corporations are trying to jump in and boycott states that are doing voter ID. Since when do the big corporations get to elect our leaders? I'm sorry, can you not smell that we are in the middle of a communist takeover when major corporations that have all the money are trying to tell we the people how our government should run? Are you kidding me? Ugh, mind-boggling. But so that's a really hot topic right now, is they're crying and screaming that this is voter suppression. And what you need to understand is there is a history of voter suppression in the United States. Sadly, there is. Before the Civil War and even for about 100 years after the Civil War, Black Americans, particularly in the South, were treated horrifically by the Southern Democrats. Go figure. Southern, yes, Democrats, the same Democratic Party that we have today that wants to sweep all that under the rug, and they don't want their history to come out that they were actually the ones completely against civil rights back in the day. Yes, they were. The Republican Party was actually started by a Democrat who was anti-slavery. And the very first Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, is responsible for abolishing it. But even after that, you would think, I always thought, well, the Civil War, like the North won the Civil War, slavery was abolished. Didn't that end all the civil rights issues? Actually, no, it didn't, because the Southern Democrats were pissed that they lost, and they started putting in all kind of crazy laws. Something you can look up if you want to. It's called the Jim Crow laws, and I'm going to do a video about that and explain so people do understand that we are not sweeping our history under the rug. We're not trying to say that bad things didn't happen and that people were never oppressed, because they absolutely were. The handful of Jim Crow laws that were passed treated Black Americans horribly and were designed to not allow them to exercise the civil rights and their freedom that abolishing slavery had given them. It was terrible. And again, I'll do another video on that. But here's what you need to understand about today. Asking or requiring a citizen of a state to have a form of ID to show when they go to vote that says they are who they say they are is not voter suppression. Okay? In comparison to what happened back in the 1800s and 1900s to suppress Black Americans from keeping them from exercising their civil rights, which they absolutely had 100% in full, were disgusting. And it was certainly nowhere near just asking for a voter ID. They would move ballot boxes. So if you had to vote for multiple house or multiple positions, you would vote for your mayor on one side of town and your state representative on another and your senator in another. They did horrific things. Before the Civil War, they went so far as to actually this might have been after, the Democratic Party would have people standing outside of voting booths with guns. They would put a gun to a Black American's head and tell them that if you don't vote Democrat, we're going to pull this trigger, because the Republican Party had emerged and they were anti-slavery and they wanted to give civil rights to those Black Americans. So all sorts of horrible, crazy stuff went on. And yes, again, I keep saying this, but I'm just a talker. I have to wrap this up. I will do a video that details that specifically so that you can understand that just because I'm a conservative does not mean I deny the fact that we had issues with racism at one point and probably still do to an extent in our country, but we have come a really long way, and voter ID is necessary if we want to move forward and maintain the integrity of our election process, which has pretty much been obliterated in 2020, but we're working to end that. So auditthevotepa.com. If you are a resident of Pennsylvania, you have not been to that website and signed our petition, please do. We're headed to Harrisburg, capital of Pennsylvania, on April the 21st. It's a Wednesday at 10 a.m. From 10 to 12, we're going to put on an event, kind of like a press conference. We're going to have speakers lined up, and we are going to hand deliver our copy of our petition, which will hopefully by then have 10,000 signatures on it. We're approaching 7,000 now. We want to hand deliver that to our representatives. Our Senate and our House are in session that day. That's why I get a lot of questions, people saying the middle of the week, that's so inconvenient, I have to work, and I totally understand. But if you don't have to work, if you can get it off and you can meet us at the Capitol, we're going to be on the steps of the Capitol building at 10 a.m. on Wednesday, April 21st, to make some freaking noise so that they will audit the vote, auditthevotepa.com, sign the petition. And that's why we did it in the middle of the week, is because we wanted to do it when the House and the Senate were actually there in session, because they need to feel the pressure. They need to know that people are not just going to let this go. They are being told by the GOP leadership, our legislators, that they just need to move on. We just need to move on from 2020. We'll make some election reform, yada, yada, but they don't want us pulling back the curtain and figuring out what really happened. And if we make enough noise, after all, this was supposed to be a government for the people, of the people, and by the people. And if we make enough noise and we keep on them enough, I do believe that we can make some change and we can see some things happen so that the fraud can be exposed, we can fix it moving forward, and every election from here on out can be safe and secure. So that is it for today. Probably episode 5 of Let's Get Educated. We're going to talk about voter suppression, probably talk about racism, go through the Civil War, and just really talk about some hard topics about things that happened in our country that are absolutely horrific, and we need to make sure never happen again. So I enjoy sharing with you guys each and every time. If you know somebody in Pennsylvania that doesn't know the history of voter ID, that you think this could help, please share the video. Love you guys. See you soon.